Why did this photograph completely change a soldier's life? What was the force that drove him to travel thousands of miles and find a family he had never met, all because of a small piece of square paper he found on the battlefield? If you have similar stories, you can send them to the email address in the description.
I am Danny Cooper, from a small town called Bloomington in Indiana State. My hair is brown, my eyes are blue, and I am of average height. My mother always said, "You are a typical American boy." My father, John Cooper, was a local farmer, and I was planning to work with the land just like him. But when I enlisted in the Army on that cold winter day in 1943, responding to our country's call after Pearl Harbor, I had no idea that nothing would go as I had planned. It was June 1944. After the Normandy beaches, we were advancing into the interior of France. The sun was slowly setting, and the sky was painted with orange and pink tones. Around us, there were only ruined houses, mud, and the traces left by war. With every step I took, broken glass pieces, metal fragments, and debris crackled under my feet. That day, our battalion was stationed near the town of Saint-Vith. The town was small, maybe 1,000 people lived there. Most of the houses were bombed, windows were shattered, doors were torn from their hinges. The streets were silent, only the echo of distant cannon fire could be heard. The air was cold, and my green military uniform was covered in mud from the wet soil. Together with my comrades from the unit, we were inspecting the remains of a ruined house. I could guess that the house had once been beautiful. It was a 2-story structure made of red bricks. Now, however, the upper floor was completely destroyed. The stairs were torn from their places and the walls had collapsed. Flowers must have once grown in its garden, because I could still see a few withered rose stems emerging from the soil. My friend Mike O'Connor was a Boston kid, tall, red-haired, with a freckled face. He was always joking, always smiling. "Danny, there's not much left here to inspect," he was saying, kicking the debris with his foot. I, however, was searching for something among the belongings that remained under a collapsed wall in the corner of the house. It was at that moment that my hand touched a small object emerging from the soil. At first, I thought it was a piece of metal, but the texture I felt between my fingers was different. When I cleaned off the dirt, a small photograph stood before me. Its corners were slightly torn. It was a black and white family photograph. In the photograph, there were 4 people. In the center, a handsome man of about 30 years old was sitting. His hair was dark, neatly combed, and his eyes looked determined. He was wearing a clean suit. Next to him stood a beautiful woman with light-colored hair, presumably his wife. The woman had a happy smile on her face, and I could read warmth in her eyes. In front of them were 2 children. One was a boy of about 10 years old. The other was a little girl of maybe 6 with curly hair. Both children were smiling. When I looked at the back of the photograph, these words were written in fine handwriting: William Margaret, David and Sarah Mitchell, Christmas 1942, Detroit, Michigan. Below that was this sentence: "When the war ends, we will all be together." At that moment, an indescribable feeling awakened in me. This was not just a photograph. This was a family's last happy memory. Maybe William had gone to war. Maybe Margaret was waiting for him with the children. Or maybe I did not even want to think about the other possibilities. Mike came over to me and looked at the photograph. "What's this, Danny?" he asked. "Someone's family photograph," I said. "Probably a family that lived here," Mike shrugged. "These things happen in war. Leave it alone, we have other work to do." But I could not leave that photograph. That night in my tent by candlelight, I looked at that photograph again and again. The determination I saw in William's eyes, the happiness on Margaret's face, the innocence of the children, they all reminded me of my own family. The same determination in my father John's eyes, the same warm smile of my mother Mary. The next day I went to our commander, Major Roberts. Roberts was a 50-year-old, gray-haired, experienced soldier. His face was always serious, his voice was stern, but his heart was soft. "Sir, I want to ask you something," I said. "Speak, son," he said without lifting his head from his map. "I found this photograph, sir." If you give permission, I would like to try to find this family. Roberts looked at the photograph, then at me. Son, you came here to fight, not to search for lost photographs. I know, sir, but this photograph, my voice trembled. This family might be waiting for me? Maybe William died here and they are still waiting for him. Roberts remained silent for a long time. Then he took a deep breath. All right, son. But this is your personal business. Your military duties will not be affected by this. And so began my long journey. First, I spoke with the local French people. An old man living in the town, Pierre Dubiot, was 60 years old, white-bearded, walking hunched over but with intelligent eyes. When I showed him the photograph, he said, this family stayed here, in broken English. During the German bombardment, they were very good people. But one day they disappeared. What I learned from Pierre was this: the Mitchell family were not war refugees fleeing from America. William Mitchell was an officer serving in the American Army and had placed his family in this town, which was thought to be safe. But when the town was bombed, the family had scattered and disappeared. This information both excited and worried me. So this family had indeed been here, but where were they now? Days passed. I was both performing my military duties and searching for this family in my spare time. I spoke with every person in the town. Old Marie, 70 years old, wrinkled-faced but with very good memory, was a woman. Yes, I remember that family, she said. The little girl was such a sweet child. She always played with flowers. Her mother was also very kind. She helped us. What I learned from Marie was more detailed. Margaret Mitchell had fled from the town with the children during the bombardment. They had gone north, perhaps toward Paris. William was not at the front at that time. He had come to check on his family but had to return to his duty without finding them. This news gave me hope. So Margaret and the children were alive. But where were they? A week later, our unit moved toward Paris. This was a perfect opportunity for me. In Paris, there were refugee camps of the Allied forces. Maybe I could find the Mitchell family there. When we arrived in Paris, the city was still experiencing the joy of liberation. The French greeted us with flowers. The streets were decorated with flags. But I was only interested in one thing: finding the refugee camps. The first camp I went to was in the north of the city. Its commander, Lieutenant Anderson, was a tall, serious-faced man. When I showed him the photograph, he checked the records. No, we don't have such a family in our records, he said. The second camp was in the south of the city. The person in charge there, Sergeant Williams, was a short, fat, cheerful man. Wait a minute, he said while looking at the photograph. These faces look familiar, but I'm not sure. When I went to the third camp, my hopes were beginning to fade. But the nurse there, Nurse Johnson, a medium height, black-haired, kind woman, looked at the photograph and immediately exclaimed, "Yes, I remember this family. They were here a week ago. But now they have boarded a ship to return to America." My heart started beating rapidly. Which ship? Where are they going? They went to Le Havre port. They were going to board a ship there that would go to New York, but I don't know which ship it was. Le Havre was about 200 kilometers from Paris. I needed to get permission from my commander. When I went to Roberts, I explained the situation. "Son, you have really fixated on this matter," he said, laughing. "All right, I'll give you 3 days' leave. But be careful." The journey to Le Havre was very difficult. The railway lines were bombed, bridges were destroyed. I traveled by trucks, on foot, and sometimes with farmers' carts. The scenery was the same everywhere: ruined cities, empty fields, traces of war. When I arrived at Le Havre, the port was very chaotic. Thousands of people were trying to return to America. Ships were constantly coming and going. The port chief, Captain Morrison, was 60 years old, dressed in sailor style, tough-looking but kind-hearted. When I showed him the photograph, he said, this family, while thinking, yes, I remember. They went to New York on the USS Liberty ship 3 days ago. I was too late. The ship had already set sail for America, but at least I knew they were safe. Now, what I needed to do was return to America and find them. The war was still continuing, and I returned to the front. But now the photograph I carried in my pocket gave me strength. In every difficult moment, I looked at William's determined face, Margaret's warm smile, and the children's innocence. Months passed. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. The war was over. Now it was time to return home. But I had something to do before returning to my home. When I returned to America, my first task was to go to Detroit. There was a Detroit address on the back of the photograph. Maybe the family had returned there. In Detroit, I searched the phone directory with the surname Mitchell. There were dozens of Mitchells, but I could not find William Mitchell. Then it occurred to me, maybe William had died in the war and the family had moved somewhere else. I placed an ad in the local newspaper. Mitchell family sought. William, Margaret, David, and Sarah Mitchell. Important memento to be delivered. 2 days later, the phone rang. "Hello, I am Margaret Mitchell," said a woman's voice. "I saw the ad in the newspaper." "Who are you?" My heart was beating very fast. "Mrs. Mitchell, I am Danny Cooper. I am a soldier, and I found something that I think belongs to you. What did you find?" she asked, excitement in her voice. "A family photograph. It says Christmas 1942, Detroit, Michigan on the back." There was a long silence on the phone. Then the woman started crying. "Oh, my God," she said, sobbing. "That photograph, William's only memento. We thought we had lost it in France." "Yes, ma'am. I found it in the town of Saint-Vith in France. I searched a lot to find you. Please, please come. Let me give you the address. The children should see it too. Oh, this is a miracle." The next day I went to Margaret Mitchell's house. The house was in a nice neighborhood of Detroit, a 2-story white-painted wooden house with a small but charming garden. When I knocked on the door, the woman from the photograph opened it. Margaret had aged a little, her hair had grayed, but the warmth in her eyes was the same. "Are you Danny?" she asked, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, ma'am. Please come in." The inside of the house was warm and intimate. The walls of the living room were filled with family photographs. Margaret told me to sit down. "Children," she called out, "come here." David and Sarah came running. David was now about 13 years old, tall, a handsome young man who resembled his father. Sarah was 10 years old, still innocent-faced, a beautiful girl. "Children," said Margaret, "this is Mr. Danny, the soldier who found your father's photograph and brought it to us." I took the photograph out of my pocket and gave it to Margaret. When the woman took the photograph in her hands, tears began to flow from her eyes. "William," she whispered, "how handsome you were." "Mom," said David, "did Dad die?" Margaret hugged her son. "Yes, son. Your father died in the war, but thanks to this photograph, he will always be with us." Sarah also hugged her mother. "I remember Daddy," she said. "He always told me stories." Margaret turned to me. "Danny, you have given us a very great gift. This photograph means everything to us. William's last memento." "How did he die, sir?" David asked. Margaret took a deep breath. "In the Normandy landing," she said, "he fought heroically, but he could not return." At that moment I understood that William Mitchell's photograph was not an object I had found by chance. This was his last gift to his family, and I had been chosen as the instrument for him to deliver this gift. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said, "thanks to this photograph, I also learned many things. How precious family, love, and memories are." Margaret smiled. "Danny, you were an angel for us. William's soul has found peace now, because his last memory has returned home."
And so, a small photograph I found on the battlefield took me on a journey of thousands of miles and returned a family's most precious treasure to them. That day, I understood that what we lose in war is not just lives, but memories too. But sometimes miracles happen and lost memories find their homes. This story taught me that nothing is a coincidence, that everything has a meaning. Maybe you too have witnessed a similar story.